Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second in the series of AWS Well Architected webinars. In this one, we're going to be talking around operational excellence. So a quick look at the agenda. We have an introduction to ourselves and Zen. We're going to run through why operational excellence, why you need to care about it. We're going to go through the design principles for the operational excellence pillar, some best practices for operational excellence, summarizing some key services, and then a bit of a summary and conclusion at the end. So getting started, my name's Carl Simpson. I'm a technical architect at Zen, but I also run the AWS engineering professional services team. I've worked at Zen for around 15 years now, and I was one of the founding members of our Zen Cloud Solutions business unit. So that's when we first became an AWS partner back in 2013. I'm also joined here today by my colleague, Andrew Stollery. Andrew, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, guys. My name's Andrew Stollery. I work in the customer solution architecture team. We're responsible for doing the designs that get handed over to Carl's engineering team. We work in a consulting and design capacity for our customers in Zen Business. I've not been with Zen for quite as long as Carl. I've only been here for it's almost 8 months now. I've spent 6 years building, designing, operating cloud infrastructure at various organizations. And working at Zen now and starting to look more at the AWS side of things, but also still keep my Azure skills up to date as well.
Okay, so moving on, we will give a bit of intro about Zen and our partnership. So I briefly mentioned it says 6+ years ago, so it's probably 7+ now. But we're an AWS consulting partner. We've got 30+ accredited staff in a range of different certifications, from AWS Solution Architect Professional to Advanced Networking and DevOps Engineer Professional. We're also one of the first 50 well-architected partners for AWS globally. And in the last 12, 18 months, we've delivered more than 30 well-architected reviews for a range of different businesses. And Andrew, are you going to tell us a bit about?
Yeah, so we've been a Microsoft Gold partner in a couple of competency areas for over 15 years now. My qualifications and that of the engineering team contribute to that status, as well as the number of licenses and other things that we can support our customers with. And we were a global launch partner for the EC2 service when Windows Server became available as part of that.
Okay. So just a bit of a recap, because this is a series of webinars that we're doing. So a couple of our colleagues, Matt and Callum, they did an introduction to well architected session. So that's one of the earlier sessions. So if you want to check that out, they give a more rounded overview of well architected. But if you have watched that, you'll be aware that there are 5 pillars to well architected. There's operational excellence, security, reliability, performance efficiency, and cost. And in this one, we're focusing on operational excellence. So why operational excellence? So often is the case, businesses are running business critical workloads. A failure of those workloads, it might be critical to the business. It might have a critical negative impact on the business. So if you really care about the workloads you're running in an AWS environment or any environment, you should be caring about operational excellence. You should also be looking to run your IT infrastructure and technology stack efficiently and effectively. And one of the things with cloud is that if you're not using it, your competitors probably are using it now, and they're using that to exploit the benefits of easy access to new, faster technologies that you might not have had access to in the past. So they're able to do things quickly and easily and faster than yourselves. So looking at how you operate efficiently and excellently is obviously key. There are a number of reasons you might not want to care about operational excellence. You might like to be stressed and sleep deprived. You might like your teams to be stressed and sleep deprived. or maybe just like the excitement of the next crisis and not having any idea of how you might handle it. So if that's you, then probably stop watching here, and this is probably a crisis that you need to get back to. Looking at a bit of the stats here, so we've got some stats from the number of reviews that we've done. So if you look at the table there, I've highlighted the operational excellence ones, but as a quick note on security. Security is where we've actually seen the worst score of 7.8 high priority issues on average. But also, if you look at operational excellence, it's second worst in terms of high priority issues, and it's worst in terms of being in a well-architected state. So there's definitely lots of areas for improvement in operational excellence and getting yourself to a higher working standard. So that's a bit of the why and some of the background of what we've seen. Moving on to the design principles. So I'm just going to run through these. So number one is perform operations as code. So within an AWS environment, everything, or pretty much everything, there are a few exceptions, can be done using API calls, and they can be templated and scripted. So that can be the creation of your infrastructure, any tasks like patching, any sort of security updates or testing, all of this processes and things that you might have had to do manually in a traditional environment. You can perform those operations as code now. And obviously one of the advantages of that is that the code will do what the code does, whereas if you have a person doing a manual task, then potentially there's variation and scope for errors there. Another advantage you get, and another best practice, is around annotating documentation. So when you're in a traditional environment and you're in your own hosted environment, you might be doing certain things manually. You might be pointing and clicking to set things up, or physically doing things. What you can often find is your documentation doesn't match the reality of what your environment looks like. So you have to record it separately. One of the advantages you can get from AWS, you can do things like tag your resources. So you can tag the owner of a resource, to say who's responsible for it. And you do that in your code when you define that resource. So when you change it, and if that needs to change, it's right there and you can see it there and then. You might also want to tag resources with a security tag to say it's something that's highly important from a security perspective. You can easily differentiate between production and development and testing environments. So if it's a physical server in a data center, you don't necessarily easily know whether it's production or not. But if you're tagging and defining all your infrastructure as code, you can easily tag that when you launch that infrastructure. And then the other advantage that you've got around annotation documentation and infrastructure as code is you can check that into Git. And then you can do things like annotation tags, so you can actually have a tag on certain commits to tell you what's going on, what's changed, why it's changed. So you've got documented changes rather than in the past where you might have someone just point and click and change something, or physically change something and no one ever knows about it or knows why they've done it. So that's annotate documentation. The next one we've got here is making small, frequent, reversible changes. So don't try and take on too much at once. You want to have small, little, bite-sized pieces. It makes it far easier to manage. Continuing on with that theme, lots of people think it's far better to batch up a lot of changes. You've got a truckload of changes. You want to put them all into production at once. What you actually find there is if you batch things up, you put everything through at once, you're much more likely to get something that's going to get stuck. And when something gets stuck, nothing gets through. So you don't want any of that. What you're far better with is these small pieces. You can easily change direction, and even if there's a problem with some of them, because sometimes even the small ones get stuck, the other changes should get through, and you're delivering value into production and you're providing business benefit. On to number 4, that's around refining your operational procedures and doing that frequently. So don't just write your documentation, don't just write your runbooks. Definitely write runbooks, but if you are going to write them, don't just write them and forget about them. What you actually should be doing is looking to test them. So AWS talk a lot about game days in their best practice, which is around simulating events. You might even go to the extent of actually creating events and issues. There's stories around Amazon and how they sort of built this approach. And there's a guy called Jesse Robbins, who his actual job title at AWS or Amazon was Master of Disaster. So his job was essentially about creating failures in things like real data centers and having the teams make sure that they can handle it. So he'd run scenarios like turning off a data center, and in the early days, things failed and things went wrong, and people said, please turn it back on now. And it was quite harsh and strict around that, and the background of the fire service and fire drills. So it's all taking those ideas and taking those into your cloud environment and your sort of IT solution and thinking in that way. So I'd recommend searching the topic of chaos engineering, because there's a whole field here which is around creating chaos and destroying things. Now, you might have people in your organization that just do that naturally, but there's a real sort of approach there, and there's business value to having sensible reasons for doing that now. So moving on to number 5, we've got anticipate failure. So like the picture here, think about your spidey sense, think about what might be about to go bad, what might go wrong, try and preempt that, try and put things in place to mitigate certain failures. So in an AWS example, you might get to the point where you can use an auto-scaling group. So if a machine fails, a new machine will come up to replace it, things like that. And then the final one we've got here is learning from all operational failures. So things will definitely go wrong. That's just how it is. Many of us wouldn't have jobs if things just worked perfectly all of the time. But the key thing here is when things do go wrong, learn from them, learn what you can do and why that's happened. There's a great quote here from John Allspaw, who's a bit of a pioneer in the field of safety, critical systems, IT systems, and how you should take an approach to blameless postmortems and learning from failure, and appreciating the fact that humans will make mistakes. They'll continue to make mistakes, but how do you learn from that? How do you put things in place to help when those mistakes happen? So that was the design principles. Just a really quick recap. We've got form operations as code, annotate documentation, make frequent small reversible changes, refine operations procedures frequently, anticipate failure, and learn from all operational failures. So the next part of this is around, so that was the design principles. This is the best practices. So we've got 3 of these. First one being prepare. So out of the 3 best practices, prepare is the most significant one you should be thinking about for operational excellence. So it's about putting good practice in place up front to make it easier when you're in life. So what you don't want to do is just turn on the gas and light the stove, and before you even think about what you're cooking, what you're making, you're probably just going to get burnt doing that. So I'm going to quickly run through the areas of best practice when it comes to prepare. So that is understanding your priorities, understanding the state of your workload, improving flow, reducing defects, easing remediation, methods of mitigating deployment risks, and think about how you support a workload.
And so what are the key activities around this preparation area? Are we talking about living documentation and run books and playbooks and things like that, or are there other key activities that need to be done? Yeah,
so there's a whole range of things there, I suppose. If we go with number 1, start your priorities, define what they are right now. So many people's priority right now should be putting Kubernetes into your environment. That's the number 1 thing you need to do to solve.
Kubernetes is the answer. What's the question?
Exactly, yeah, and that's a common case. Now, there's definitely a use case for it, and there's business value in having that. But rather than just putting a solution in there and thinking, and then that being a solution, it's about thinking about what your priorities are. What are your internal needs? So what do your internal teams need to more effectively support your environments and deliver business value? What things do you have in terms of external needs? So what are your customers asking for? Are you in an industry that's regulated? So as a compliance requirements that you need to consider. And you might have things like trade-offs. So if speed of market is the most important thing to your business, you might compromise availability or potentially cost to just get things up and running, get things out there quickly. But if you're a bank, for example, then security is likely to be number one priority. So you'd prioritize things relating to security first, and then perhaps be a bit slower in your rollout of things. So that's your priorities side of things. If we pick on number 3, improving flow, you've got things like continuous delivery pipelines. And again, when we talked about your application and your infrastructure, you can define that as code. So you can easily revert back to a previous version. And that allows you to safely roll back. So it's not you make a change and you don't actually know what the previous state was of your environment. You've got that documented code. You can roll it back. You can run that change through a pipeline. So yeah, there's a couple of things to think about there.
That's sounding a lot like the 3 ways of DevOps. So flow, feedback, and then the third one, which is continuous improvement. Yeah.
So you're referring to the, I suppose, Phoenix project and
absolutely,
side of things. So yeah, obviously, a lot of the things that are covered in the framework come from they make use of and share the ideas and the principles that you might get from books like the Phoenix project and the more recent one, the Unicorn project.
Great book. Both of them are great books, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we'll move on to operate. So operate, obviously this is the in life, the operation, things that you're doing while the environment's running. So once you've got things up and running, how do you keep it running effectively? So the key areas here are understanding your workload health. So that's the infrastructure, that's the environment that's running, the application that's running. Understanding the team health and how you effectively manage events that happen in life.
So this we're talking about here sort of regular QA checks, pulling out useful logs and metrics, and I guess implementing that reliable CI/CD pipeline stuff.
Yeah, that and yeah. So understand the healthy workload. So yeah, it's where things like often people might put in things like measuring CPU and disk utilization and infrastructure related metrics, but they're not actually thinking about the application and what it does. Often capturing more business related metrics like how many users are successfully logging into your site every hour or something like that. So you can actually see the impact and the change in user behavior, and that will give you an indication to whether something's healthy, not just your server's using a little bit more CPU than normal. That might be fine. You're getting better cost value for you're getting better resource utilization for that. Things like your team health. Then there's going on to referencing books and things. Again, Andy, I suppose there's things like Accelerate, which is really useful in terms of giving you talking about how you measure what's going on in terms of the health of your teams and the health of your ability to deliver software and infrastructure.
Is that another IT revolution book like the Phoenix project, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's by Nicole Forsjan and Jez Humble. So Jez, and I think Gene Kim's involved in that as well, if I remember right. Yeah. But it was around the where was I going with that? So there is, it's another one of those series of books. Another book that's related, that's useful there, is the DevOps Handbook, which talks around a lot of these sort of ideas about effectively having your teams work.
Yeah, I was really taken by the metrics piece in that, about building things that tell you the health of the business and the flow of value to production, rather than just picking, like you say, something static or something common like CPU and RAM, actually making it something that's valuable to the business as a metric rather than just the IT team.
Yeah, the other idea in there is employee net promoter score. So not just net promoter score for your customers. Actually run that with your staff and get their feeling of how happy they are working in an environment, because the last thing you want to do is have all your operational staff just walk out the business, because that's probably going to create a problem. Unless, of course, you've got really good run books, and then the new team can come in and pick up from that.
Yeah, well, that sort of fits in with that second ideal from DevOps, doesn't it? Around improving the joy of your workforce.
Yeah,
definitely one for supporting that, and one that we do at Zen quite well, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on. The final area we've got in terms of best practice is evolution. So your business might make the best typewriter in the world, but if it's 2020 and you're still making typewriters, you've probably not really got a market there. So you should be looking to constantly evolve and progress. And what you don't want to be doing, IT is a bit like standing on a travelator that's going in reverse. If you stand still for too long, you start going backwards, and you eventually fall way behind. So you should be looking to continually evolve your operational practices and the way you're working, and just to stand still, really, you need a level of evolution there. So areas we've got in regard to evolution, we have continuous improvement, feedback loops, you should be defining the drivers for improvement. You should be looking to validate any insights you might have, perform metrics reviews, and sharing of knowledge across your team. So, and if we pick feedback loops as an example there, so a continuous delivery pipeline where you're automating tests of not only your application code, but of any infrastructure changes, and you run through your pipeline. You get feedback quickly to that. So rather than batching up changes, as we mentioned before, as soon as you've made the change, you commit that to your source control, you run that through a pipeline, and it runs certain tests. You know whether that's worked and whether that's successful, rather than waiting for a few weeks or months to find out whether that change actually works, because you're only testing it once you've gone into production.
What's that quote from Andy Jassy, the CEO of AWS? Is it invention requires two things? So the ability to try lots of experiments, and two, not having to live with the collateral damage of those failed experiments. I quite like that, because that kind of describes that whole thing about feedback loops, doesn't it, and improving continuously. Yeah,
and that's a key thing in an AWS environment, or any cloud environment. You get to experiment, you get to try things, and it's much lower cost than it was in the past. You can spin up 1,000 servers to do a proof of concept of something. You can run them for a few hours, and if you decide that was a bad idea, you turn them off. You haven't just ordered 1,000 physical servers to your data center and decide it's a bad idea before they even arrive, but you've already committed to the spend there. So you've got a lot more flexibility to test and experiment in a cloud environment. So just pick on a further one in this area, the sharing of knowledge, and that's definitely a key. It's your operational team should be not just learning things on an individual basis, but you should have mechanisms of sharing that knowledge and sharing that learning, and putting processes in place for doing that, and having communication potentially across teams as well, not just within teams. So arranging catch-ups and working out how you could do something better by understanding what other teams in the business are doing and what their needs are. So don't just look to optimize your local area.
Yeah, I'd seen that working quite well in a previous organization where they were going through an agile transformation. So rather than just having the teams that worked on products, but also having those cross-functional teams that kind of got around ideas, if you will. So like either automation or, something that multiple disciplines could come together on and improve.
Yeah, there's definitely real advantage for having cross-functional teams and different perspectives and different areas of expertise. And yeah, you bring those together and you share those. The whole team gets better if you do that. Oh, and I've missed one off. So enabling improvement. So this is core, I suppose, to all of the other things, really. If you don't actually enable improvement by setting, then the key way to do this is set a percentage of time available for that and ring fence some time for making improvements. If you run a team at 100% all of the time and don't allow any time for improvements, it doesn't matter how good your ideas and thoughts are on improving things. They just won't happen. They won't get done.
I guess that's about having time in to pay down that technical debt, is it?
Exactly, yeah.
So if you've got a sprint of 2 weeks, having 2 days of those 2 weeks set aside for technical debt work. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it needs to be built into the process, not just something that you might do when you get to it, because typically you never get to it unless you factor that in.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, there's a global pandemic, and then maybe that frees up some resources. So,
we've all got time to learn now.
Yeah. But yeah, there we are. So yeah, that was evolution. And my slides have gone wrong here. We'll cut that out. Onto key services. Just a few key services to call out that fit with AWS and operational excellence. So we've got AWS config and config rules. So when we talk about prepare, you can define rules that are aligned with your compliance and standards that you want to adhere to. And therefore, if you then deploy something into your environment that doesn't meet the rules that you've defined ahead of time and your best practices, so you might want to enforce that machines are tagged with a certain tagging policy. If you define in the prepare stage, if you put all these config rules in place, it means when it comes to doing stuff in life and operations, if someone or something launches resources in a non-compliant way, config will alert you to that straight away so that you can deal with it there and then, not find out about that in 3 months' time when you've got a crisis going on and you suddenly need to know what's what.
Can you get it to auto-remediate as well, to make it the config that you want?
Yeah, you can have it trigger automatic remediation. So if you're using Amazon Lambda it's sort of like your Swiss Army knife tool. You can have it make calls to Amazon Lambda, and Lambda can do whatever you write the piece of code to do. So Lambda's the serverless function. So yeah, you can have something like automatically terminate a machine if it doesn't match your compliance standard. So you're not even having to get a person involved in that. Similarly, in terms of automation, that leads nicely onto Systems Manager. So Systems Manager it's come together quite nicely over the last few years, and it's one of the services that's had a particular focus around Windows initially. It does support and do things with Linux, but it allows you to manage and automate the build of your machines, so your AMIs, your Amazon Machine Images. You can also use it to manage patching. There's Session Manager for logging into the machines. There's a lot of stuff there around automating processes that you might have traditionally done manually and had a person doing it. You can actually have that managed by various different run commands and tasks and automation jobs within Systems Manager. Another one we've got here is Amazon CloudWatch. So that's their monitoring tool. You've got CloudWatch metrics, CloudWatch logs, and CloudWatch dashboards. So that'll give you a view of what's going on within your environment. So that fits more into the operate side of things. And then things like Elasticsearch service, that can enable you to gain insight into information that is in your logs, so you can use that in terms of evolving things and getting insight into what's going on, and then that can inform the decisions you might make to make improvements in certain areas, because it's all very well capturing your logs in CloudWatch logs, but if you don't ever look at them and do anything with it, then they're not going to be the most helpful of things for you.
So is that talking about integrations with alerting services? Like, I'm not sure what we use in Zen, but I've come across things like New Relic and firing those alerts off to other products that use webhooks?
Yes, so our approach with it, we use Opsgenie currently for our notification system. So we might configure a lot of alarms within CloudWatch, and CloudWatch can hook into their simple notification service, and that can call out to things like Opsgenie. You might want to send alerts and notifications into tools like Slack or now Microsoft Teams or services like that to allow easy visibility of things. But yeah, you can easily integrate that with various different third-party tools.
PagerDuty was the one I was trying to remember.
PagerDuty, yeah. So yeah, that's some of the tools that relate to operational excellence. So onto the summary. I'm just going to bring out the things that we've talked about. So we've gone through the design principles. They're there on the screen now. I won't read them all out again. Gone through the best practices, the three key areas: preparation, operations, and evolution. And so the final bit is onto how we can help at Zen and things that you should be doing. Andrew, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this is typically how we see the well-architected process run. We get in there, we do the analysis of what issues you've got, and then we split out into focusing on the various different priorities in this flow, if you like. So the first stage is putting out those fires, getting those critical issues looked at, which also helps because it goes towards the claim you can make of AWS to contribute to your monthly spend. Then the next bit is actually getting in shape and tackling those remaining critical issues to get the environment looking good. And then from then onwards, it's basically staying in good shape. So usually if you're a customer of Zen, you'll have a named architect on your account who will help with this. So typically what we see in the cloud is that things don't stay still. So having someone who's got your back, who's looking at the latest and greatest things from AWS, can help make sure that you stay in good shape for the long term. So yeah, that's usually where we fit in and bring the best value to our customers who are operating in AWS at the minute.
Yeah. And I suppose to add to that, we've also got our in-life service as well. So as well as if you might be wanting to run it yourself, but if there's certain bits that you'd like help with running, we can help the in-life operation there and the day-to-day running of certain parts of the environment. So that's it for now. As I said, this is the second in our series of well-architected webinars. So we're going to be having sessions on the remaining 4 pillars. So look out for those. And I also mentioned if you've not seen the intro one, then check that out as well. But that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for listening.